Hello everyone, it's myself, Jonathan, also known as the PC Genie yet again. Today we're going to be talking about, of course, whether bows can be used in close combat. Now admittedly I was planning on talking about this for a bit of a while, but I noticed just today another YouTuber, Scalagrim, has uploaded a video about the topic, so I thought, well, now's as good a time as any. So, on to the topic at hand. Now, obviously we see in fantasy and fiction all over the place, you see a lot of characters such as the Green Arrow using their bows quite effectively in close combat. But when you look at the practicality and how realistic it would be, assuming, we're not in some strange world where physics are working differently, and the human body is made differently, there are a lot of things that we can know about how useful these things are. Now, one of the first things to mention is that you can't really use a bow like an actual quarterstaff. As has already been mentioned by Scalagrim in the video, the weight is in the handle and the limbs are designed to bend. But just beyond that, the fact that the string doesn't allow much movement, the fact that the bow itself tends to get in the way if you try to do any kind of parry, and, well, the fact that if you are impacted by some kind of cutting weapon or even a blunt weapon, if there is even a bit of damage to the bow, just, if there's splitting happening, then although you could potentially still use the bow in close combat and you could maybe start doing shooting, it is very dangerous. One of the key things that is a problem in archery when you have an old bow is that you can have maybe a hairline crack, just something that quite minute. You go up and you're just at the range, or maybe, let's say in a battlefield situation, you're there, you draw your bow and it's alright until suddenly, snap. The bow, it does what we know in archery as a bow explosion. Unfortunately, it's not like a Michael Bay explosion where you go, wow, it's more like the thing snaps, it goes whack into your face, and that's -1 bow for you. So, one of the things you have to ask is, do you really have to use a bow in close combat? Now, granted, it is something that is quite fast. Bows are lightweight, so that's one thing that is in favour of the bow. It's got some heft, your typical bow stave, especially with something like an English longbow, something of a thicker wooden stave, is something that's got some weight to it, just like, a good stout stick. And it also has, of course, especially again in the case of a longbow, quite a bit of length. So that's something in its advantage. But I say it can't be used like a quarterstaff again because in the areas towards the tips, of course, it thins and the weight lessens. So if you're trying to strike someone around at the end of the bow, then you're not going to have that much impact happening. Basically, all of the force would be concentrated in the middle of the handle. Even if we're looking at bows that are designed for maximum sort of draw weight capacity for the same, for maximum speed in the arrow for the same draw weight, where they bend the entire way through. We're not talking about a significant, what's called riser, this part in the handle that's blockier and heavier, even if it is just a lot more gradual, again, so it bends all the way through, it's still got exactly the same problem to a lesser extent. So you're not going to have much impact and force if you're doing hitting moves. So, if you're deliberately deflecting a weapon, opposing it with a parry, or even bringing one of the ends to actually strike someone, it's very inefficient. Now, one of the things I distinctly noticed wasn't mentioned in Scalagrim's video was that one of the best things you can do with a bow to use it in close combat is, although you have to consider its qualities are like a quarterstaff, when you use it as a weapon, you pretty much have to imagine it's a spear. So although the ends aren't going to be very good for smacking things and doing that kind of impact trauma, you can still use the points, the nocks, where the string goes, at either end, for thrusting. So just like a spear, you can deliberately stave your opponent, do lots of jabs, and do perhaps some heavy thrusts that cause quite a bit of impact. And even on something like a bow, in fact, especially on a bow, because it does taper towards the tips, that's one thing that is to the bow's advantage. unlike something like a quarterstaff where you'd have a fairly consistent thickness all the way through, because the way it tapers, it does, although it's not sharp, it's not something that's going to be a devastating weapon like a real spear or partisan. It is something that will cause noticeably more concentrated force in the point. You know, even if it is on just a knock like this, and I'll give it a close-up. I mean, it's a round stave. You know, you can't expect it to perform fantastically, but if needs must, in an emergency situation, bam! You could maybe, you know, take him in the neck, do some kind of gut thrust, perhaps a hit in the solar plexus, groin, get the legs, all sorts of places, and punish the hands as a forward, trying to present a threat with a sword or something. So you've got those options, even though, again, you're at an extreme disadvantage because you haven't got a real polearm. That pretty much is where the advantages end. One of the key problems is with any way that you'd hold a bow. You know, if I'm holding it like this, like it's a spear in a Fiore's window guard for a poleaxe or spear or something, and I'm thrusting like this, if I'm using the back end and thrusting like this all over the place, or if I'm just using it as if it's a normal spear, and I'm thrusting like this, and I can parry with very gentle movements, which is something that is an advantage. The fact of the matter is, my string is forward, and anyone who knows a bow, if I was a swordsman or someone using an axe or anything sharp, as soon as I saw someone like this or a bow, I think one of the things you could deliberately do is, apart from the fact that you can hack a bit at the stave of the bow, cause it to split and maybe snap, just even from the tension of having it strung, never mind drawing it. You could also, if you're lucky or perhaps deliberately, catch the string. And believe me, if you ever have a string go on a bow, even though it's not as extreme as a bow explosion where the stave snaps and hits you in the face, just having the string go and it suddenly straighten and cause vibrations through your hand, especially if you're holding the stave like this, it's probably enough to sort of go, whoa, you know, kind of, you're feeling that impact in the hand without the opponent even having to strike you. And then while you're off guard, they can chop your face off, you know. So, again, a lot of disadvantages. Now, another thing we could look at is, of course, what about the arrow? Now, one of the key reasons why an arrow is good when it's shot from a bow is that in the head, because of the weight distribution, I mean, let's find a point of balance on this. Actually, this one's got a fairly light arrowhead because it's for field shooting, you know, just at the target. But if you had a proper war arrow, I mean, it's already a bit forward balanced, but with a heavier warhead, it's going to be even further balanced forwards. And because of that, it means that when the arrow strikes a target, you've got the force concentrated there, and then bam, punches through, which is good for being shot. However, it means that, of course, as we know, arrows have a good bit of flex, and if I was trying to stab someone, so I was holding it here towards the back, which makes sense for reach, obviously, and I'm trying to, you know, get someone who's got a sword length, which is going to be even longer than this arrow, by the way. I mean, I've got a sword right here. This is a bit of a short version of an arming sword, and yet, comparing where I have my hand, so here it is, it starts here, and we've got a noticeable good few inches difference already. And that's if you ignore the later versions of swords that tended to be sort of thinner and more pointy, and are often even longer. So it's an even worse disadvantage. Stabbing like this, I'm likely, I mean, even now, I don't know if you saw it, I'm stabbing, and I mean, I'm not great at thrusting, but most of that flex and wobbling around you're seeing, just doing that, is the arrow itself. It's actually bending just from me extending my wrist. That's how flexible the arrow is. So apart from the fact that you won't be stabbing straight, it's also very likely to just bend and thus, you know, reduce the amount of thrusting force you've got, or worst case scenario, snap. So then we've got, what's the next option? Well, you can hold the arrow right towards the end, and at which point you've basically got to use it like a dagger. This is a viable option If you don't have a knife or dagger yourself, then you could maybe, although you've got this back end that's going to be in your face as way and maybe catching on your arms or armpits or something, you could maybe use it like a dagger and, you know, keep jabbing and thrusting, and if you're especially an aggressive type of fighter, you could close in and charge at the opponent, risking life and limb in the process, and then if you were able to get up to that range, just stab their guts out, like using a dagger. Of course, you have to ask though, why not use a dagger? I mean, I don't know if you notice now, but right in my belt, I've got a knife. And very easily, I could carry one. And even if I'm a peasant who can't afford swords and stuff, I'll probably have a knife anyway. There are almost no instances where I wouldn't have an actual knife to fight with. So then we're basically talking about dagger fighting as opposed to bow and arrow fighting in close combat. Now, apart from that, we have to also consider that there is an even greater disadvantage to using things like bows themselves in close combat, if we're talking about shorter bows. Now, the longbow is quite tall. This version, although it's not a completely authentic medieval bow, it's more of a Victorian style with laminates and a stiff riser, you know, handle section. It is of approximately the sort of thickness and height that you would expect on an English longbow. So it's about 6 foot tall. I'm 5'7". You can see it's got a few inches above me. So it's got that reach, which hence, like I said earlier, makes it a better spear. But if you're someone from further east, the chances are, I mean, I don't have a Scythian recurve bow or Mongolian recurve bow or equivalent, but we'll use this training bow I've got for now. You'll notice that my advantage of reach in pretending it's a spear is pretty much immediately lost, and when the bow's more bent with the way that shorter bows work, it has to curve further, even in just stringing it, the string is even more in my way than ever before. Now it's quite a bit up my forearm, it's a struggle to manoeuvre it about, to do any parries or strikes, and of course I can't line up the stave, unlike with a longbow, or, you know, of course with a real spear. I can't line it up properly. It's so curved that I have to almost account for that by, you know, stabbing around with it. So I might be jabbing upwards like that, or jabbing downwards around left and right. It's very awkward, more so than using something like a longbow. So yeah, all in all, I'd say, I mean, really, why would you use a bow in close combat? One of the last points I'll leave you with 2 final points to think about. Firstly, I'm an archer, right? Either I'm just that sort of archer who's skirmishing about. So we've got these people, knights, with presumably maybe mail armour, brigandine plate, you know, heavy stuff. Even though they're not going to be lumbering, you know, at sort of walking pace, they'll be chasing us at full speed. I can still run faster than one of them. So if someone like a brigand is assailing me in the streets, in the forest, or someone who is a knight is trying to chase me on the field of battle, I've got basically no armour and no weapons to carry out. I can throw my bow down, maybe drop my arrows as well, and run. I'm probably going to get out of there unless something shoots me on the way. And then we have option 2, where we're looking at maybe later English longbowmen and those sorts of things in a professional army, where I'm going to be equipped with decent armour, and guess what? Then we come into the sidearm scenario. I have a sword, and there's a theory that has been going around, and I believe it myself, that actually archers would probably be able to have a buckler, a small shield, attached on their belt in battle, so then I can use my bow. Sure, I can be an idiot and try to use that, or why don't I just do what the rest of the knights are using? I've got a sword, I've got a shield, let's fight on equal terms. So yes, long story short, there are almost no circumstances where it would be even reasonable to fight with your bow or using your arrow in close combat, even if you are being ambushed and chased by fighters. So yeah, don't do it. Use a sword. Look, belt frog. That's another recommendation. by a belt frog. Cheers guys,